Before we begin, I need you to do something. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and listen carefully. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's real. Welcome to British Hauntings, the place where true horror lives, and real stories refuse to die. If you're fascinated by haunted locations, unexplained mysteries, and the darkest true events ever recorded, then you're in the right place. But be warned, not every story should be heard alone. Tonight's story takes us to one of the most terrifying houses ever documented. A place where objects moved on their own, where voices spoke from empty rooms, and where something unseen made itself known. This is the true haunting of 30 East Drive. Before we step inside, make sure you subscribe to British Hauntings so you never miss a true horror story. Hit the like button if you're ready. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share this video with someone who dares to listen. Because the more people who hear these stories, the more real they become. Now take a deep breath, because once this story begins, there's no turning back. It was supposed to be just another quiet street, a normal house, a normal family, a normal life. But behind the brick walls of 30 East Drive, something was already waiting. Something that didn't belong. In the small town of Pontefract, England, far from the noise of big cities, stood a modest council house. Nothing about it seemed unusual. It looked like the kind of place where life moved slowly, where neighbors knew each other, where nothing truly terrifying could happen. But in 1966, when the Pritchard family moved in, everything changed. At first, it was subtle, almost easy to ignore. A light tapping sound in the walls, a door that creaked open when no one touched it, objects slightly out of place. You could explain it. You wanted to explain it, because the alternative was unthinkable. Jean Pritchard was the first to notice. She would hear footsteps upstairs, slow, deliberate, even when everyone was accounted for. She told herself it was the house settling. Old homes make noise, after all. But then, the footsteps started responding. When she paused, they paused. When she moved, they followed. That's when the fear began to settle in. Not panic, not yet, just a quiet, creeping realization. They were not alone. Her husband, Joe, didn't believe it, at least, not at first. Like many would, he dismissed it. Old pipes, drafts, imagination, stress. Until one night changed everything. Joe was sitting alone in the living room when he heard a loud crash upstairs. Not a small noise, not something you could ignore, but something violent, like furniture being thrown. He rushed upstairs. Every room was empty, but everything was destroyed. Drawers ripped open, clothes scattered everywhere, furniture overturned, and in the center of the room, a single object slowly sliding across the floor, on its own. That's when denial ended, and terror truly began. Over the next few weeks, the activity escalated. This wasn't just a haunted house story anymore. This was something else, something aggressive, something aware. Objects didn't just move, they were thrown. Knives would fly across the kitchen, heavy furniture would shift without warning, glass would shatter for no reason, and it didn't matter who was watching. It happened in front of everyone. There were witnesses, friends, neighbors, even police officers, people who walked in as skeptics, and walked out shaken. But the worst part wasn't the violence. It was the intelligence. Because whatever was in that house knew them. It targeted them, especially their daughter, Diane. Diane was just a teenager when the disturbances began focusing on her. At first, it seemed coincidental. Objects would move when she was nearby. Strange noises followed her from room to room. But soon, it became undeniable. She was the center of it, the focus, the target. One night, Diane woke up to a pressure on her chest. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then she saw it, a figure, standing in the corner of her room, watching her, not moving, not speaking, just watching. She tried to scream. Nothing came out. The figure slowly moved closer, step by step, until it was standing beside her bed, and then, it spoke, not in a clear voice, but in something deeper, distorted, almost inhuman, and what it said would haunt her for the rest of her life. From that moment on, the activity became relentless. Diane was scratched, pushed, dragged from her bed. Sometimes, she would wake up on the floor, with no memory of how she got there. Bruises would appear on her body, finger-shaped marks, proof that something was touching her. The family was desperate. They called the police. They called priests. They called anyone who would listen, and many came. But none could explain what they witnessed. One police officer reportedly saw objects flying across the room with no visible cause. Another refused to return after witnessing witnessing a chair lift itself off the ground. Even skeptics, people who came to debunk the haunting, left without answers. Because this wasn't a trick. It wasn't a hoax. There were too many witnesses, too many events, too much evidence. Eventually, the entity made itself known. It called itself Fred. Fred wasn't just a presence. Fred had a personality, a voice, a history. Through strange knocking patterns and distorted speech, the entity began to communicate. It claimed to be the spirit of a man who had died in the house, a man who was angry, a man who refused to leave. But there was something off about Fred's story, something darker, because the more it spoke, the more its behavior changed. It became cruel, mocking, violent. It didn't just want attention, it wanted control. Diane suffered the most. The attacks became more frequent, more physical, more terrifying. There were moments when she would be lifted out of bed, her body rising into the air, held there by something unseen. Witnesses described it, not just the family. Other people saw it happen. Think about that for a moment. A teenager, suspended in midair, with no explanation, no wires, no tricks, just silence and fear. The family reached their breaking point. They couldn't stay. They couldn't live like this. But leaving wasn't simple, because whatever was in that house didn't want them to go. Even as they tried to move out, the activity followed them. Objects would be packed, and then suddenly thrown across the room. Boxes would open themselves. Doors would slam shut. It was as if the house itself was alive, and it was angry. Eventually, with help from investigators and spiritual advisors, the family managed to leave. But the story didn't end there, because 30 East Drive didn't go quiet. New occupants reported strange experiences. Visitors claimed to feel watched, cold spots, unexplained noises, shadows moving where nothing should be. And even today, decades later, people still report activity inside that house. Paranormal investigators have spent years studying it, recording it, trying to understand it. Some believe it was a classic case of poltergeist activity, energy unconsciously generated by a living person, often linked to emotional stress. Others believe something far darker was at play, something not human, something that never left. Because here's the thing about places like 30 East Drive: they don't just hold memories, they hold energy, and sometimes, that energy doesn't fade. It lingers, it waits, it watches. So if you ever find yourself standing in front of an ordinary-looking house, on an ordinary-looking street, remember this story, because sometimes, the most terrifying places are the ones that look completely normal. And somewhere, behind one of those doors, something might still be moving, on its own. Silence didn't mean peace. Not in that house, not at 30 East Drive. Because even after the Pritchard family left, the presence didn't fade. It waited. For years, the house stood with a reputation no one could ignore. Locals whispered about it. They avoided walking past it at night. Children dared each other to step near the front door, but never alone. Because everyone knew one thing: something was still inside. Eventually, new people entered the house. Not families looking for a home, but investigators. People who wanted answers. People who didn't believe in ghosts. At least, not yet. They came equipped with cameras, audio recorders, thermal sensors, every tool designed to capture the unseen, to prove once and for all that the stories were either real, or nothing more than fear and imagination. The first night started quietly. Too quietly. The kind of silence that feels unnatural, heavy, pressing against your ears. One investigator sat alone in the living room, the same place where Joe Pritchard once heard the crash that changed everything. The camera was rolling, the room was still, and then, a faint knock, 3 taps. Clear, deliberate. He froze, waited, listened. Nothing. He tried to debunk it. Pipes, walls, old structure. But then it came again. 3 knocks. This time, louder. He stood up slowly. "Is someone there?" he asked. No answer. But the temperature in the room dropped. Not slightly, not gradually. It dropped instantly. His breath became visible. The air felt thick. And then, the chair behind him moved. Not a small shift, not a vibration. It dragged across the floor, slowly, loudly, as if something unseen was pulling it. The camera captured everything. There was no one else in the room. No strings. No trick. Just a chair, moving on its own.